You know when you were a little kid and your parents like took your toys away because you did something bad? Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt did that to an entire town over how they were treating a postmaster. Postmasters were appointed by presidents. So, in the early 1890s, President Benjamin Harrison appointed one lady named Minnie Cox as a postmaster of a small town in Mississippi called Indianola. Important thing to note about Minnie Cox, she's an African American female, which, post-Civil War, in the South and Mississippi in the late 1890s, big deal. Also, important to note, what other group was running around in the 1890s and early 1900s that tend to dress up as ghosts and weren't necessarily big fans of African Americans? You can see what she was appointed. One, she was a candidate. And two, there were no qualified white people to do the job, so obviously you're going to give it to the qualified person to do it, because she was actually a school teacher before that, which is like very admirable. Once she gets appointed, nobody really has anything bad to say about her because she's really good at her job. Everything is efficient, everyone's getting their mail, she's dedicated, she's committed. Nothing to complain about. She gets reappointed by William McKinley and then appointed again by Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Teddy Roosevelt is where things get interesting. Flash forward to 1902. There's a guy named James Vardaman, who is an editor of a local newspaper, that starts getting very vocal about the fact that Minnie Cox should not be the postmaster. Important to note, postmasters in Indianola in this point in time, they're making about $1,100 a year. Adjust that for inflation, that works out to a little over $40,000 a year in 2026, which is nothing to scoff at. That's very good money for that point in time. And she's been doing this for 10 years at this point. So like, she's made a pretty good amount of money. Like, that's a really big deal. Good for her. Look at you go. But Vardaman is very not happy about this. He starts doing speeches, trying to get her out of the job. Also important to note, he's a white supremacist that may or may not have been part of the little ghosty club. You can figure that one out. Gets other white people in the city together, they start having meetings, and then they hold a vote, and they want her to resign. 1903, she's like, all right, you know what, fine. I'll resign, I'll step down a year early. Her term was supposed to end in 1904. She's like, I don't want any trouble. You're also threatening my life, so. Teddy Roosevelt says, nah, fam, that ain't happening. Teddy Roosevelt says, I'm not going to accept your resignation. The inspector postmaster also says, you know, she's a federal officer. She should be protected by federal troops. And Teddy Roosevelt says, no need. They're going to get put in timeout. So he just suspends the post office as a whole in Indianola. The next closest post office is 30 miles away. Now, this is a really big problem if you're in Indianola, because, again, early 1900s, it's not like you can just, like, take a quick little field trip over to the next town and go pick up your mail and it's be fine. No, this is a whole trek. Your transportation, if you have a carriage, is exactly 2 to 4 horsepower, or you're riding a horse, which is exactly 1 horsepower. Teddy Roosevelt just does this gangster move and is like, all right, watch this. You gotta go 30 miles over to go get your mail, and you gotta go get it. It's not getting brought here, which is so gangster, so gangster. Now, all of this is going on, and Minnie Cox and her family say, you know what? It's not safe for us here. We're just going to go run away to Birmingham, Alabama. Teddy Roosevelt's like, all right, well, guess what? I'm still going to suspend this, because he put them in timeout. And he's like, you're going to get inconvenienced for a while. So he did this for a good chunk of time, just to prove a point. Eventually, the Cox family comes back to town, and all of this, again, is in the Jim Crow era. She creates 2 very successful businesses in Indianola, Mississippi, which, as an African American in the early 1900s in Mississippi, that's a really big deal. She later died in 1933. They guesstimate her age was around early 60s. She was born in the South right after Civil War-ish. We don't know her exact birth date, so it's a guess. Flash forward forever later, 2008, she gets a post office named after her, which that's pretty cool. And they also have a couple streets named after her and her husband and their family in Indianola, Mississippi, so that's just like a big ol' screw you to all the white supremacists of Indianola, Mississippi. And that's the story of Minnie Cox from Indianola, Mississippi, and I bet you didn't know that Teddy Roosevelt really, really enjoyed inconveniencing an entire town of people just to prove a point. which is such a gangster move. I love it. And that was another episode of History Briefed. Remember, if you like any of this content and you like learning about new and fun stories that you didn't know, subscribe, like, follow, turn on post notifications, all the things, and I'll see you next time. Later.